Hi, this is Ted Scott of Stormwater Maintenance and Consulting. I'm doing a presentation today on stormwater utilities in Maryland, specifically the quest for credits. How do we get credits to offset the fees that are being charged by the stormwater utilities? First and foremost, it's important to understand that the stormwater utilities are related to MS4 permits, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer Systems. These are permits that municipalities such as cities and counties are required to have through EPA. There are two different sizes, Phase 1 community or MS4 communities based on their population. In Maryland, there's a requirement, a state mandated requirement for Phase 1 MS4 communities to have a stormwater utility put in place by July 1st, 2013. These utilities do two things. They charge fees, and then they implement, the purpose of the fees is to implement the MS4 programs. One of the biggest aspects of these MS4 programs is a requirement from EPA to restore 20% of the impervious area within the municipality. This is tied to the Chesapeake Bay restoration model. It's what's projected to, that's required in order to contribute to the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay. So the 20% impervious restoration is a pretty big deal. We're talking billions of dollars throughout the Bay watershed, and municipalities are challenged in trying to find the funding to be able to facilitate this. So stormwater utilities are one way for municipalities to be able to do that. It's one way to share the burden of restoring the Bay and our water resources. First question when you talk about impervious area restoration is really what is impervious area? And it is any area or any surface on the land that will not allow water to flow through it into the soil beneath it. So any pavement, driveways, roadways, any rooftop, and any other surface that will not allow water to flow through it directly into the ground. This includes gravel in many cases. The easiest, back to the restoration of impervious area, the easiest and most direct way is to remove the pavement. This can be done pretty economically, but one of the big problems with this is most paved areas or impervious surfaces are under use. So where this really applies, if you have a site that has impervious area on it but is not in use, for a relatively low cost, you can remove that, consider that to be restored, and be able to move on your way towards a credit. Stormwater treatment is another way of restoring impervious areas, and there are two primary types of treatment out there. One is legacy treatments. These are essentially built before the year 2000. These are older stormwater facilities, and in many cases must be modified in order to get a credit. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about these and the contemporary treatment practices. These are more vegetated, much smaller practices that have been employed, really started in the early 90s, and year 2002 they started to be actually required. So they're more contemporary, usually after the year 2000, where most of these were put in. The important thing to realize is that when impervious area is restored, a MS4 community municipality receives a credit for that in their EPA permit, and so it makes sense for them when they have a stormwater utility to be able to pass that credit along to the property owners. So that's where the tie-in is from restoration all the way through getting a credit. On the hunt for a credit, one of the first questions to ask is, are there existing stormwater facilities on the site? If there is, if they are legacy facilities, then you may end up with having to continue to do additional work before you can receive a credit. But let's talk a little bit about what these legacy facilities are. They are dry ponds, which is probably the most popular, and these are essentially quite often referred to as a hole in the ground. They're usually on the back of the site, the low end of the site, and that's where all the pipes, all the storm drainage pipes will lead to on the site. The next type of legacy facility is a wet pond. These can be more aesthetically pleasing, and in some cases these are at the front door of the site because they're actually wet ponds that can be can be quite an amenity to a site or a community. There's also underground pipe and vault systems. In many cases, people that have these on their sites have no idea that they're even there until a municipality happens to inform them that they need maintenance. So these are facilities that are out there in many highly urbanized areas. They're much more expensive to construct and to maintain. These legacy facilities, the primary purpose of them was to slow down the flows. So they're often used or primarily used for flood control. They do have some pollutant removal, but it's very limited. So therefore, credits on these are very limited, in many cases not accepted at all without modification. The focus on these was mostly on large storms. And as I mentioned before, these were built, stormwater practices started going underground in the 1980s. In 2000, about 2002 is when maybe a little bit after, is when you would see no more of these legacy facilities going in the ground as a primary stormwater management. Moving on to contemporary stormwater facilities, first and foremost is vegetative practices. Now, contemporary practices are known as low impact development and Maryland environmental site design, which was required since 2007 as a mandate. Vegetative practices, one of the more popular ones is bioretention, such as this. So as you can see, this is a much smaller facility. It has a much smaller contributing drainage area, more aesthetically pleasing, and it is integrated into the site. So these facilities are stuffed in many cases it's hard to even tell they're there because they look like they're part of the landscaping. There's lots of other ones, such as specialized swales. These are swales that have check dams in them. They may have extensive underdrain and soil media beneath them, so there's much more to these than what actually meets the eye on the surface. Filtration and infiltration, these are practices that will either filter the water through sand type media or actually have it infiltrate into the ground. This is a photograph of a sand filter that's in part of a larger pond. Where the red arrow is pointing, you can see that there is a brown area of grass. That's because there is sand beneath that. There's actually a sand filter providing the water quality for this residential subdivision. Contemporary facilities focuses on pollutant removal mostly. They're dealing with much smaller storms, much smaller drainage area, and they really started in the 2000 design manual being allowed to happen in Maryland, and in 2007 the ESD practices were mandated. So after 2008 or 2009, the vast majority of sites that have been developed have these practices on them. So what if a site has no stormwater management at all? And that puts us into a situation that we call retrofit. And so there's a lot of different examples of that. This is one at a private school where a parking lot was retrofit with a small bioretention swale on the right. So this is a vegetative practice. This is, again, kind of sandwiched in between the parking lot and the adjacent stream and floodplain. This treats this parking lot, about an acre of parking lot that was previously not treated before. It certainly does qualify for a credit. This is another example in Columbia of a swale, a dry swale with soil media beneath it and check dams that treats the parking lot on the right that flows into it. This is an example of an infiltration trench. That this is not just a riprap trench necessarily. It is dug deeper with more storage in the voids of the riprap and stone that's beneath it. This type of practice has the highest credit value in most cases, but it is something that you need good infiltratable or sandy soils that allow the water to flow directly into it. In a more urbanized setting, this is a vault type system to put in. This one is installed in Tacoma Park and actually is focused on, or is designed to specifically remove hydrocarbons because it was in a repair shop type area. The practices can get small and very unique, coming down to actually removing some sidewalk areas. This is a practice that is a submerged gravel wetland that was incorporated into a redevelopment project, again in Tacoma Park, but it shows how these practices can be integrated into the landscape when previously there was no stormwater management treatment whatsoever. And along the same lines, these bioretention facilities such as this one, what was previously a mounded landscape island can now be designed to be concave or retrofitted to be concave, and an inlet's adjusted to be able to provide stormwater treatment. So many landscape islands, not all, but many landscape islands can be converted to this type of stormwater practice as a retrofit. When you have a pavement project, as any site is going to have major repaving over the course of time, when that occurs, it may be a little bit more expensive, but adding pervious pavement systems to the site at the time of other repaving projects it may increase the cost of that repaving project a bit, but with that capital outlay, you can end up with qualifying for a credit using these permeable pavement type systems. So there are other alternative practices that are not in the ground practices that some municipalities allow. Street sweeping operations are allowable in some cases, cleaning out catch basins and inlets. Community-based projects, tree plantings and different projects like that are more reaching out into the community can be a win-win in several different areas. Not only sometimes qualifying for credit, but also doing the right thing in the community and having better visibility. Stream restoration projects are sometimes allowable. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, pavement removal. In this particular case, it was a row of parking that was not needed due to downsizing, and just removing that pavement helped facilitate a potential credit. For industrial operators, there in some municipalities, because industrial operators, if they have NPDES EPA permits for their operation, they are required to have a stormwater pollution prevention plan. When that occurs, some municipalities recognize that as being a pretty high level of stormwater management in itself, and they offer a credit for the industrial operators with those permits. So what to do? When we look at a flow chart, the first question is, are there existing treatment on the site? And if there is, then the question is it legacy treatment or contemporary? If it's contemporary, you just need to apply for the credit. You should be in pretty good shape, although most municipalities are going to require that you provide evidence that it has been maintained and it is functional. If it's a legacy, then you need to, in most cases, modify for credits. Some municipalities do allow for minor credits, but most of the time you're going to have to modify it. To modify it, you're going to have to go through a design, a permitting process, and then you're actually going to construct it. Once you construct it, you can apply for the credit. If you do not have existing on your site at all, what we recommend doing is performing a credit evaluation. That's taking a quick look at the site and speaking with the people who are the property managers or facility managers of the site, and determining if there is the possibility of installing new stormwater practices or any type of practice that will qualify for a credit. If it's not possible, in many cases it's just simply not possible, there is not the room, it doesn't make sense, then that's the time to make sure that the budget is adjusted to just pay the fee. If a retrofit is possible, then the next step we recommend is doing a schematic design. This is a little bit higher level of design and certainly gets into a little bit more cost, but that allows the ability to do a cost estimate or preliminary cost estimate. Once that cost estimate is done, a cost benefit analysis can be performed. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. If that cost benefit analysis determines that it makes good business sense to do a retrofit, then it's a matter of going again through a design process, reviewing and permitting with the local municipality, and then constructing it before the permit or the credit can be applied for. This is an example of a quick look-see on a site that we've done, and we've identified several different areas where potentially a stormwater facilities may be able to put in a retrofit situation. This is the first quick look-see to determine whether or not it's worth moving towards a cost-benefit analysis. In this particular case, it seemed like there was enough opportunity to possibly be able to do that, and it's worth taking that next step. When we take a next step into the cost-benefit analysis, one of the first things that we're looking at is what is the actual fee that's being charged, verifying that the municipality is charging the appropriate fee. Some municipalities, there may be minor inaccuracies. Generally, I think the geographic information systems or GIS systems that municipalities use, by and large, are fairly accurate. But there are cases such as with parking lot islands in the middle of a parking lot that sometimes the GIS systems do not back out. So there may be, in some cases, it may be worthwhile to spend a little bit of effort on verifying those fees. In this particular case, we do have an existing detention system that this particular case is in Baltimore County, and so this would apply for a credit, even though it's a legacy facility. Baltimore County is one of the few counties that allow that without modification, but as you can see, the removal efficiency is 8%, so you're not going to get much of a credit out of it. So that comes up to $1,300 out of a $16,000 annual fee that credit would allow. When you look at a potential retrofit, there are several underground facilities on this particular site that may be able to be retrofitted. Those get a much bigger credit of 60% because they're contemporary practices, and that can get a credit of almost $10,000. Most municipalities have a limit on how much of a credit you can get. In this particular case, it's Baltimore County, there's a 74%, but when we add up those two credits that we have, both existing and a retrofit, we're looking at 11,000. That's almost meeting the maximum credit allowed. So that seems like a pretty positive thing to move ahead with. And the next step in looking at it is a schematic design, determining that what the design and construction costs are going to be. In this case, we're a little over $100,000. And so we start to wonder, is it really worth doing this? Plugging in any additional operations and maintenance costs that will happen on an annual basis. In this particular case, we concluded that $107,000 would be recouped in 12 years. And so after 12 years, it's basically money in the pocket. So this is the information that property owners and property managers need to be able to make a well-informed business decision as to whether or not the initial capital outlay, if it can be afforded, can occur, and to be able to, after the end of 12 years, to be able to actually start to realize a positive return from this investment. Overall, though, there's other residual aspects of this: doing the right thing for the environment and improving water quality for the site. Talk a little bit about municipalities. Again, this is in July of 2013, and things have been changing quite a bit and probably will continue to change. So this material could be dated at any point. Just a real quick summary of what the fees are. Municipalities are using an ERU, or equivalent residential unit, which is rather confusing when you start to compare different municipalities to each other. An ERU may be a different size in one county versus the other, so we prefer to break it down into how much are you paying per impervious acre on your site. So Baltimore City, you're $1,700. They have a maximum credit of up to 55%. They do allow the participation credits, so the community things like tree plantings and different community events that people can be involved in, mostly residential folks. With the existing or retrofit practices, they require legacy facilities to be upgraded to get any credit. Any retrofits are going to have to be contemporary practices. Maintenance is going to be enforced. And there's going to be a 45% maximum credit on those based on the treated area. The alternative practices I mentioned before, Baltimore City is one of the only municipalities that's requiring that. So if you have a street sweeping program or inlet cleanouts, you can claim some credit for that. There's a vacant lot credit for the small vacant lots, or vacant lots that have small impervious area on them. Industrial operators, as I explained, will have a 55% pretty much automatic credit. Any dischargers, any sites that discharge directly into the harbor will have 30%. Religious structures only, not the site, will have a $350 cap, but the non-structural, i.e. the parking lots and things, will be at the full rate. they've incorporated a property tax cap rate of 20%. So your stormwater utility fee will be no more than 20% of your base property tax in Baltimore City. Moving to Baltimore County, the fee comes down a bit. We have the potential for maximum credit goes up quite a bit, also to 74%. But these credits are based on the pollutant removal rate. So depending upon, it doesn't matter if they're really legacy or contemporary, whatever the research has shown is the pollutant removal rate, that will translate for different types of practices, that will translate directly into the value of the credits. Howard County, the fee comes down. It's just about where Baltimore County's is. Got a maximum 50% credit. A little bit simpler is a site development plan in Howard County that was signed after January 1st of 2003 will definitely qualify for a credit. Automatic may be too strong of a word, but as long as there's an as-built and there's proof that it's functioning, there should be no problem getting a credit in Howard County. Anything that was SDPs that were approved prior to 2003, they're going to be considered legacy and have to be modified to contemporary unless the facilities were actually put in as contemporary. They have a reimbursement program to encourage retrofits and modifications to the legacy facilities. There is pending legislation at the time of this presentation originally that was looking at adding a 20% property tax cap, looking at nonprofits, that's faith-based organizations and nonprofits like that, getting a full credit on it, but they must do retrofits on their sites and bring their sites all the way up to contemporary practices, but a grant program was being proposed to be funded through the stormwater utility to help facilitate that. In Arundel County, fees is very similar. There's a 1-year 60% phase-in. So after the first year, it'll go to full to the full fee, a 50% maximum credit on the sites that were contemporary. The credit's going to be based on the actual treatment area. The legacy sites will have to be modified. And if there's no stormwater management, it's going to have a retrofit. Lots of unique rates in this county. Marinas, airfields, schools, farms all got into the game, and so there's unique rate structures for each of them. The industrial NPDES permit holders have a 70% credit, which is pretty generous for them. Religious capped at $1, and there's an overall property tax cap rate of 35%. Again, what that means is the stormwater fee cannot exceed 35% of the base property tax. Hartford County, very low fee, a 10% 1-year phase-in. So even though it's a very low fee for the first year, there will be only 10% of that fee charged. After that, it will jump up to the full fee. There is a potential of 100% maximum credit written into the legislation. I think that may apply to unique circumstances such as volunteer fire departments. Their credit program is not established as of the time of this presentation. They're looking at probably in late 2013 for that to become solidified, as a task force is assigned to work on that. So all in all, that's a summary of where we're at in July of 2013 on how to track down credits for stormwater utilities. Again, my name is Ted Scott. Feel free to hit our websites at mdswm.com is the main one. We've got a link on there to be able to, you can see what our services are as related to helping you search for these credits. Thank you very much. Have a great day.